Hi, this is Markus Hantschk from All About Tennis. As this is my first video in English, please bear with me if my English isn't perfect. But as some people ask me to also produce English versions of my videos, I've given it a try. Okay, let's start. This video is an answer to some viewers' question: how does the wrist action of a forehand topspin work? The most important job of the wrist is bringing the racket head up from down here and putting the topspin into the ball, as I already explained it in my German forehand video. I always describe this as a wiping movement, just like a windscreen wiper on the car. I'm really surprised how many players spend so many thoughts on the wrist and what it's doing in every phase of the stroke, even though the wrist action is an important part of the stroke. Some of your thoughts are going extremely into detail, but let me tell you something. You don't have much time to think and care about too many little things while hitting a ball. You learn the stroke by concentrating on the essential important movements. Everything else is just a lot of practice. However, it can be useful to go into detail if somebody has a special weakness in a certain stroke or in a part of a stroke. As the wrist action appears to be a very interesting part for many players, I've decided to make a video about it and explain the things I do as exactly as possible. When I play a forehand or backhand topspin, I always talk about this wiping motion of the wrist to get the topspin into the ball. I bring the racket straight up from down here when the ball is already descending. I can also close my racket a bit more and make this wiping motion more forward. This is necessary when I take a ball that is still rising, as I take it very early just after it bounced. This way I prevent the ball from bouncing up from my racket and flying far too long. At this point I would like to take a closer look at this wrist action again, as there are many discussions about that. Can I turn the wrist this way to bring the racket head up? Yes, I can. But which joint is actually making that movement possible? The forearm is responsible for turning my wrist. Is this important or necessary to know for a tennis player? No. I would even go that far to say that it is confusing, giving the player far more information than needed to improve. And don't forget the limited time you have to practice effectively and concentrate on the important things. So I prefer to talk about the wrist making the racket go up and putting the spin into the ball, since the focus should be on the wrist. I separate the forehand stroke into three phases. Firstly, the take back of the racket. Then the phase of accelerating the racket and finally hitting the ball. And then the finish of the swing. My take back is pretty extensive. As I'm not hitting the ball yet, my wrist and my complete arm is still very relaxed at this time. You can see that because my hand is hanging down back there, pretty relaxed. This is a peculiarity of myself that you could do differently. Doing it this way, for example, the wrist and the racket would be already in a more useful position to start the swing. However, the arm should be as relaxed as possible in this phase. At the end of the take back, down here. I bring the racket in the right position just before I start to accelerate the racket towards the ball. The racket head shows back and down a bit, and this side of the racket shows slightly to the floor. Now the second phase starts as I start to hit the ball. Firstly, I accelerate my racket by swinging my arm and rotating my upper body. At the starting point, my wrist and forearm are still relaxed. My racket stays back for a short moment while my arm is already swinging. You can compare this with a car accelerating from a standing position, and your body and head is pushed into the seat. Shortly after starting the swing and before I hit the ball, I start to turn my wrist to bring the racket up. At that moment, my arm and my wrist aren't relaxed anymore. The grip tightens up, and my wrist and forearm have to work very hard to get the racket head up in a perfect way to touch the ball and put the topspin into it. It is very important that the ball doesn't push the racket back or up, hitting it. Otherwise, I would lose control over the ball and send it way beyond the line. The focus lies almost completely on the wrist and the wiping movement. I always try not actively to hit the ball with the wrist, because that would result in a loss of control. Of course, during the wiping movement of the wrist comes a bit to the front. There, the wrist just returns to its natural position, as it initially gets pushed back a bit due to the acceleration. Once you hit the ball, the arm and wrist can relax a bit again. But for me, it's very important to completely swing the racket through to its final position. As the racket is extremely fast while hitting the ball, it takes a bit of strength to control the final swing. Therefore, the wrist and arm can't quite relax as much as during the take back of the racket. Okay, this is pretty much all I have to say about the wrist action during the topspin forehand. My advice is to concentrate on the most important thing, and this is the wiping movement of the wrist. A lot of the other things come automatically through intensive training and increasing power of the stroke. I hope this video was helpful for you. As always, I'm going to wish you a lot of fun while practicing, and really appreciate your thumbs up. Until next time, see you.